I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Where are marketers getting it wrong when creating content and SEO strategies with AI?
The bigger issue that we're seeing is they think that AI will replace and be the strategy, not be a tool in the strategy.
It just leaves out all the most common pitfalls of like duplicate content and just the mess of your sitemap now. So it's like it can get you maybe 50% of the way there. And I think it's an awesome tool for just people.
I think that is a huge misunderstanding of how AI works. And I think it's a tool in the process.
I'd say it's most effective as a tool to accelerate the workflow of the experts. But I don't want to discount the initial research on the advertisers.
All right. Welcome back to SEO On-Air. I'm your host, Koa Kauwe, the SVP of Partnerships at Stand Ventures. At Stand Ventures, we partner with agencies across the globe for link building and SEO fulfillment, and we're happy to be joined here by two agencies that we like, that we've learned a little bit about. We've only known them for a few weeks, but we're excited to have you guys as guests. Thanks for joining us. So starting with Curtis, tell me just a little bit about yourself and your agency. I want the viewers to know a little bit about you and what makes you a great guest for SEO On Air.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Curtis Johnson, owner and founder of ROI Samurai, a digital marketing agency specializing in measurement first and results later. We focus on delivering the best results possible on the strongest measurement foundations. Where a lot of agencies may focus on just running your ads, we focus on what revenue is coming from those ads and measuring those as deeply as we can. So check us out at roisamurai.com.
I think we're going to have a good session. I just had a chance to chat with Joey a little earlier, and I think his goals align a lot with the way you go about the revenue generation. I'll be curious to hear that a bit further into the conversation. Before we get there, though, Joey, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the agency.
Yeah, my name is Joey Randazzo, and I own SEO Growth Partners. We're based here in Portland, Oregon. Our approach is really content-rich content marketing to help our clients rank on Google, rank on ChatGPT as well, drive traffic, and then drive results, leads, revenue, etc. Outside of that, I got a 2.5-year-old kiddo that keeps me crazy, and my wife's pregnant with our second, so about to get crazier.
Well, today, to have you guys with us, we're going to dive a little bit into, and I think it's seen as somewhat of like a filler word almost, but authenticity in marketing today. They're kind of sitting in between analytics and authenticity and trying to find the balance between like AI use and genuine strategic strategy. So I'm excited to have you here and kind of see how you guys are approaching it from your end of things. To start, I'm going to throw up the first question here, was just discussing the evolution of marketing. So marketing success has historically been measured by keywords, phrases, traffic, rankings, leads, and now revenue attribution seems to be heavier than ever. How has the way we measure marketing success evolved over the last few years?
I want Curtis to take this one first because I'm very curious. You seem deeper in this game than I do, but I'm there as well, and I think I have some thoughts based on what you said.
Yeah, so measurement first has been our approach, since the founding, and things are just evolving faster and faster on that front. So we like to take the lens of last touch as just part of the story. We definitely need to be looking at all the touches, all the touch points. And they're historically, U-shaped model is about the best you could do there. And then data-driven attribution has become more prevalent thanks to Google. And now it's all about multi-touch attribution and having a data warehouse or a data lake where you're then able to kind of ingest that data and figure out which touch points are the most valuable across longer time spans than cookies would allow. And as cookies are deprecating, that's really forcing everyone's hand away from your traditional pixel-based reporting to server-side conversion API setups that are then helping to fuel really multi-touch attribution models and engines that are ingesting a lot of first-party data from either the CRM or a data warehouse if they have that set up.
Curtis, I'm going to jump in here and say I understood some of the words that you just shared with us. Can you break that down a little bit more for like the average person?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may imagine you're shopping for a pair of shoes. You go online, you Google, some brands you're into, maybe some competitors, and then you forget about it. And then a couple weeks go by, and you go back to one brand that you remember, or another sale ad pops up. You click on that, you add it to your cart, but then you get distracted by your kids. Another week goes by, and then you just go direct to the website and you check out. So from the website or that brand's perspective, you came in direct and marketing did nothing. But there was actually like a Reddit post and a YouTube ad and maybe some programmatic display that showed to them, 4 weeks prior, 3 weeks prior. So how do we attribute credit to those touch points as having influenced you? And that's just become harder and harder with the cookie banners. Everyone's seeing the cookie banners on websites where accept cookies or don't accept cookies. And iOS users, everyone on an Apple or Mac is effectively invisible because of what's called ITP that was put in place by Apple a couple of years ago. That essentially prevents marketers, advertisers from tracking those earlier touch points or even the final touch point. So that's where things like conversion API have become the best practice workaround, essentially, to recoup some of those loss tracking, and then to extend the duration. If you do go 4 weeks between first touch to last touch, that's where first-party data, CRMs, and data warehouses are crucial to be able to stitch together a first and a final touch point. And if it's just an impression as a first touch point, then you'll have to also use the ad platform data and some impression trackers to track those. But
yeah, thank you for breaking it down a little bit more for me. I appreciate that.
I've got a question for Curtis. I mean, this sounds enterprise. Like, what does this make sense for a small business?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can be cost prohibitive to set up a whole multi-touch attribution model and stack, because there's some technology platforms that will be needed for those. So I think it depends a lot on how much you're already reliant on marketing budget. If it's 80% of your sales motion, then it could be worth it even for a small business to set up as much as they can. And there are some more beginner friendly, or you could say small business friendly ways to go about it, especially like server side conversion API setups. That would be the first step. And there's things like Stape.com, which has some smaller packages for smaller advertisers to get started to essentially just recoup the 30% of cookies that are invisible now.
Right. So I think we work with more of the small to medium sized business, and I think about this in terms of I think a lot of small business owners get confused, and they might try to overcomplicate things. And I'll share it through one use case of like we're onboarding a new dental implant office tomorrow. They have a single doctor. He can max out at 8 a week. That's like maxing out. And I was in their office last week during the kind of pre-onboarding sales call where they were asking questions. And I was asking questions to them, and I said, where are your clients currently coming from? Where are your patients currently coming from? And they pulled up their CRM. They pulled up a bunch of different reports from a previous marketing agency trying to look at multi-touch and all these different things. And after 10 minutes, they just had confused themselves. They could probably have used Curtis there to, walk them through some things. And at the end of the call, at the end of all this, I just said to them, I said, does your intake coordinator ask how they found about, how they found out about you? And they said, no. And so in that instance, it's just like they're really complexifying it when they're a small business that does 8 procedures a week maximum. And so for them, like the human asking, how did you hear about us? People might not know. They might have seen an ad first and then searched and then got a referral. It might have been multi-touch, but just hearing their story of like, how did you hear about us? Probably could be really valuable for that type of small business. And so I think there's, on our end, we're looking at tools and options to make that data analytics much stronger and clearer. At the same time, like sometimes just when that dispatcher for a plumbing company answers the phone, they do a quick, how did you hear about us? Like, it's a quick question that's easy, that can add more color to the story of how the user thought that they found out about this company. So those are, you know, kind of conflicting, but not to Curtis in terms of measuring that story.
Yeah, I think I'm going to jump in here because one of the biggest mistakes, I want to ask you guys about some of the biggest mistakes we see from agencies, because optimizing that is complicated. Some of these small agencies are going to try to over optimize it and never make revenue because they get so stuck in the weeds. Where's the balance there? Where's the balance there, and where are these companies making the biggest mistakes when it comes to ROI?
Yeah, I could jump in there. I would say I would look at it almost as a maturation curve, where you start with the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit. You know, how did you hear about us on the forum? And then expanding that into pixel-based tracking, you know, which you should be doing some conversion tracking with the free pixels that are allowed. You know, Google Analytics 4, you know, is a free analytics package that every small business owner should lean on first. And then if you're still feeling like there's gaps beyond that, then you start needing to consider the paid solutions, which I kind of laid out like an ivory tower version, more enterprise grade. But you would just figure out the lowest cost barrier of entry for each of those, like a server-side conversion API setup would probably be as far as you'd need to go as a small business. If you have analytics, some robust, you know, form, how did you hear about us, and server-side, you're probably in a good shape to understand what's driving your marketing success.
So once you get all that in place, it's a question of the content and how it connects to the user.
Well, I think also there it's a question of, Curtis, I'm curious how you talk about this with your clients, is how do you weight and grade which touch point, you know, is more worthwhile to put budget into versus the other? And I'll give a use case of, like, we've never tested meta ads for our business. Now that we're a little bit bigger, we're able to test different channels. And one channel that we're testing is sending donuts to local businesses here as just like a cold outreach, really bizarre strategy. But I'm running meta ads, and the meta ad says, hey, Portland area business owners, go to Google right now and search for best SEO agency in Portland, and you'll see us ranking first. And so, like you said, that meta is the first touch point, and then they go to Google and like, I don't know if this guy's legit or not. And then they see that we are dominating, and then they click from Google, and then they'll, you know, GA4 will show that last touch as a Google search. What is more important? In this instance, I think getting in front of the cold user on Meta, because they're not actively searching on Google in the first place, getting them to stop and disrupt their scroll, but without that storytelling of getting them to then go to Google or ChatGPT and search and validate that we are ranking at the top. I think it's like, this one's weighted 50-50. But in your instance, how do you think about weighting if it's a five touch point attribution for a specific sale? How do you know, if a marketing manager comes to you and says, should we put more budget in step 3? How do you validate step 3 was really worthwhile to put more budget into versus step 4?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's two paradigms, basically, lenses that we could look at this through. On-site versus off-site kind of being the big splits. So if it is a meta-based impression and they just see the ad and then jump over to Google, then there's nothing more that our analytics package or really any MTA model would be able to pick up on when it's just that impression. So then we basically need a separate set of KPIs for that more mid to upper funnel buy or marketing campaigns. No, those could be, you know, minimizing your cost per view, or, you know, more in like an account-based marketing, which is again more the enterprise. You'd be like, which named accounts have we got in front of? Which ones have been on the website? Cost per page visit, you know, would be like the most bottom of the funnel for that more demand gen focused upper funnel buy. And then the on-site we do have kind of the whole framework that we lay out with clients where we'll back into a target cost per each stage of the conversion funnel. So if they understand their lifetime value is X, and then we or maybe their average order value, and then they'll back up to shopping cart, added item to the cart, first visit to the site, and we measure the conversion rate or the fall off rate from basically which percentage of people who visited the site actually purchased something. That'll help you back into like the actual target cost per visit that you would be willing to pay, or that the business should be willing to pay in order to yield a one-to-one ROI given their average order value or lifetime value. And then you could fluctuate that up or down depending on how aggressive you are on sales targets versus cost efficiency. But that gives a nice framework to understand how much is this a good cost per cart ad or cost per visit, or is this a bad one? It's all tied to their actual revenue in terms of average order or lifetime value.
Right. I have another question because this is really interesting, and I'm just curious in terms of like multi-channel, how you think about like, what if someone's doing Meta, programmatic, YouTube, Google Ads, and email marketing? Again, like, at what point do you say put more budget into email marketing because that channel is going to get your average order value down and exceed the goal, versus put more money into Meta because Meta is having X performance, and if you put more money there, we're more confident that stage, 1 out of those 5, that one's going to get the final goal further along.
Yeah, that's a very common problem for the mid to large advertisers who are going multi-channel, maybe because they've seen success, maybe because the CEO just wants to run TikTok ads. It always depends. But I would say the first, realistically, they're oftentimes measuring them in silos, which is not the best way. So they'll set up the same conversion events across 7 different platforms, and they'll measure which one is getting the last touch attribution, or if they're more sophisticated, they'll be valuing view-through conversions as well, to not kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and only take the last touch as valuable. So that's kind of your first pass, is to measure them in silos and just get a kind of directional idea of which channels are yielding any conversion events and which are not. And then tying them all together is where it gets really tricky, where that's really that multi-touch attribution, cross-channel attribution layer that would need to be put on top. Google Analytics tries to do some of that, so that could be like your starting point to understand where Google Analytics is attributing credit to each channel for each important conversion event. But then there's attribution partners, and there's dozens of these quote-unquote attribution partners that really, that's their whole focus, is to help with cross-channel attribution, which then feeds straight into media mix modeling. And so they are sometimes called MMM partners as well, because that's really what they're trying to do, is trying to give you a clear recommendation. Like, if you shift 20% of your budget from Twitter to Meta, you're going to see X amount of lift.
Right. Yeah. My final thought on this question is that we work with more of the small businesses, and they ask this as well. Like, what I'm thinking about investing in SEO. I think it could be worthwhile, but like, I just don't know. I've got X thousands dollars to spend a month. Where do I shove that money? And I think anecdotally, we like to ask the questions as well. Like, I was talking with a junk removal company this morning that reached out, and I was asking them some of these questions of, where are you allocating your budget right now? And, he shared that he was allocating some of it with Meta, and I was like, what's the lead quality there? Or I asked him first, what's the cost per conversion there? Kind of siloed, what's the cost per conversion in terms of cost per lead, not sale? And he said, whatever the number was, $22. I said, what percentage of those convert into paying clients? And he's like, so 1 out of 6, because they're scrolling through political videos and puppy videos when they see our ad. And then I said, okay, well, when you do get leads on Google, what percentage of the time do they close? He's like 75%, right? Because they're looking for a junk removal company right now. They got a bunch of stuff in their garage they need to get out, and they're ready to make that purchase. So like that adds more complexity when you silo it out of like cost per lead data, especially if you're not able to get down to the granularity of cost per revenue, cost per conversion in terms of revenue, which I know you can get down to. So that adds a little bit more clarity to you. But I hear a lot of business owners talk about cost per lead. And I think that metric is a tough one when the lead quality can be drastically different from one channel to another, which it's just really complex. It's not easy.
Right, and it's a hard conversation to have as you start to expand channels, to move from purely bottom of the funnel hand raisers who are like actively searching for what you're selling to something like connected TV, and then trying to measure the cost per lead equally. Like
one at Netflix at 11 p.m. with their cuddling with their dog, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like even if you put a QR code on there, we're going to expect a much higher cost per lead there, and we shouldn't even be measuring it on leads. We should have a separate set of KPIs for each stage of the funnel.
The data is not always easy. We're talking about that. I had a chance to speak at radio show as an SEO company, and we were talking about how these radio ads can be awesome. But if your radio ad says you're a lawyer, and now someone goes and searches for a personal injury attorney, and you're not doing your SEO right, you just paid for someone else to get business. And there's no way to know how that's converting. I kind of see the complexity of like determining which one is really the most effective when all of them influence the buying decision and not being able to communicate that directly to your customer. There's an interesting contrast here because Curtis, you're talking a high level of data. And the small, medium businesses, they're like, you're trying to pull every bit of the dollar out you can to get them to do their ads correctly so that you can pull data that's even accurate because you're just kind of taking a guessing game with the keywords you're going after. Is there any tip for that small business to do their ads right? Or do they really just have to take the guess or to throw a bigger budget at it in order to understand the data? How do they try to filter it at a high level when you don't have a lot of money?
I think Curtis made some really good points earlier. Like there's GA4 and there's some things that you can do with some easy tutorials to try to track things. You can track form submissions. You can track, click to call. You can track some things that a lot of small businesses are currently tracking none of, right? So it's getting at least 50% of the way there. Perhaps they don't have a server side, option to pull in all this data and have multi-touch and know that this one person where their last touch was Google. Before that, they had Meta, and before that, they had something else. Like that would be great, but something's better than nothing. And so getting into GA4 and just a lot of businesses that we work with, either they have GA4 set up and it's not configured at all. It's just raw data that has nothing going on, or they don't even have GA4 set up. And so like that's the starting point that we recommend. And then, if we can integrate into their HubSpot or into their Jobber, if they're a home services company, then we want to try to integrate that GA4 into their CRM. It's going to be last touch. We're not going to the level of multi-touch that Curtis does, but I think at least it's better than nothing. And again, we really asked, on their form submission or the phone, we really encourage our clients, ask them how they heard about you. Self-attribution is not going to be 100%. We know that. We're not claiming it's 100%. But at least asking, how did you hear about us on the forum and how did you hear about us on a call is going to paint a little bit clearer of a story. And then we say, good, you're 70% of the way there. Before you were 0% of the way there. And now you're 70% of the way there in terms of, okay, this client said they heard out about us from SEO and GA4 validates that. Awesome. We have some level of consistency there. It's not
just pointing them in the right direction to throw their dart will help them get a little closer to the target, right?
Right. Yeah, and I always try to avoid just throwing more money into the marketing budget, and try to focus on what I call a bottom-up approach, where we build like a minimum viable product. I mean, there definitely is like too small of a budget, which I call the drop in the bucket scenario, where you're just not spending enough to move the needle. If you're spending $1 a day and your average cost per lead is $20, you have to wait 20 days to maybe get one. So there's definitely a minimum, but we try to start with the closest to the minimum, just for benchmarking purposes, so that we can start measuring in Google Analytics. If they do get a lot of call volume, then we definitely need a call tracking provider to integrate that data into Google Analytics, so we can track, both phone and website conversions. And then we just start benchmarking the performance of different ads and different channels and audience targeting to see what is driving the best results in terms of conversion events that we have tracked. And one other thing I would add is UTM tracking. I think is skipped a lot by small businesses, but that's a hugely impactful way to improve your ability to track what's working and what's not in a single source of truth, whether that's your CRM or Google Analytics.
Curtis, I've got a question for you on how you handle call tracking issues. So, potentially working with a client that does grease collection for restaurants, and then they give them a rebate. I didn't even know that this industry existed. So they go and they clean out the grease. They have their own big tub there. Once it's full, they ship it over to Hawaii. That turns into jet fuel, and they get paid on that. So they give the restaurant a little bit of a kickback. But calls, hey, we're a restaurant. We're based in Seattle. We need help. And I said, what sort of call system tracking do you use? And he said, just like Comcast, like real legacy. But at the same time, he goes, we want to know where every lead came from. And I said, well, do you ask them how they heard about you on the phone? Like, no, we're busy. Like, we're just trying to get them, serviced as quickly as possible. Once we win that contract, they're ours for a while. And it's this catch-22 of they don't want to change their call tracking system, but they want to know where every lead came from. Like, are you just pushing them? Like, we got to change the call tracking system, or you're going to have unreliable performance. And the only thing that you can track is more calls, and just hope that that's because of our efforts. Those are the options.
Yeah, and hope it's not like a bunch of junk calls being driven, right? That's a tough conversation to have for when they're really stuck with their existing call system. But a lot of times, some of these call tracking providers can just lay on top of the existing system. So it'll be, we're not going to change anything with your current number or how it's routing. We're just going to create another dynamic number that sits in front of that one, and it's going to forward the call to your regular system. So that way it's like a tracking layer over top that can integrate with Google Analytics and by extension with Google Ads and other ad platforms.
Does a platform like CallRail do something like that and layer in? Yep.
Exactly. CallRail is one of the big ones in the space. Calltrackingmetrics.com is one.
Call Tracking Metrics is a really robust one. And
they've all kind of coalesced over the past decade or so. There used to be more, and I think now there's really just two or three big ones in the space.
I'm gonna pivot the call to the next question. One thing you guys are talking about with all these different buckets, I'm thinking about how that represents brand across the internet. I'm thinking, man, it's hard to pull all that data and make it useful. And now we're also integrating AI tools that are recognizing brand across the internet and giving it authority in search results for AI. But there has been a lot of use in AI in marketing teams that are trying to simplify their labor use. And it maybe is getting overutilized today by some marketers. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Where are marketers getting it wrong when creating content and SEO strategies with AI?
Yeah, I'll take this one and start with it. I think there's both the strategy and the execution. The amount of older business owners that have reached out and said, here's my ChatGPT SEO strategy that I had a conversation with ChatGPT about. Can you validate that this is correct? And it's oh no. So that's one, is they're trying to get the strategy out of it. The bigger issue that we're seeing is they think that AI will replace and be the strategy, not be a tool in the strategy. So a perfect example of that is a roofing client that we have out of the East Coast. And he came to us about 12 months ago, and he had created 300 location pages overnight. So, he services an area, and then he services about 65 miles in every direction. And so for every locale, just AI-generated slop is the best way I could describe it. And thought, I'm going to game the system. I'm going to win. I can now create 300 pages overnight with AI. This is amazing. and naturally had a hard time getting those even indexed, let alone performing. And so I think that is a huge misunderstanding of how AI works. And I think it's a tool in the process, and I can share that a little bit later, but I'm curious what Curtis's thoughts are.
Yeah. I, on one hand, I love the fact that business owners, advertisers are able to self-educate themselves, and for those that are willing to take the initiative, can really.
I want to throw this in that I'm pretty sure AI didn't tell him to build 300 location pages.
I might have. He might have said, hey, look, I served this geo radius. I want to make sure I show up to people in those areas when they search for roofer near me or roofer in XYZ city. And maybe it did tell
I'm thinking he saw something that said, this is a good idea. Hey, ChatGPT, can you help me do this? And it was like, of course I'll help you.
And then it just leaves out all the most common pitfalls of like duplicate content and just the mess of your sitemap now. So it's like it can get you maybe 50% of the way there. And I think it's an awesome tool for just people. It saves us a lot of time on calls needing to explain concepts, or it could save us, and can, when advertisers are willing to kind of do some of the pre-research on their own and then share it with us to validate it before they go and create 300 pages.
Yeah.
So on that hand,
Great
I think
example,
it's
Joey.
great.
Thanks for sharing that.
Well, it's not the first time we've seen it.
And then the other thing I was going to say was, we are using AI heavily to help create, ad copy, for instance. Like before, that used to take, 30 minutes or maybe even up to a couple hours to make, the most compelling ad copy. And now we can churn out, 6 different variations very quickly that may touch on areas we wouldn't have even thought of. And that's just one use case. But, in SEO, there's more. So I'd say it's most effective as a tool to accelerate the workflow of the experts. But I don't want to discount the initial research on the advertiser side to be able to really just wrap their head around novel concepts that are new to them, so they can come to the conversation much more informed.
I'm going to jump in here and share that I did build an entire website for my wife's company using Claude and GitHub and Cloudflare. And I feel like technically I've hit pretty much everything that I could possibly have hit using this tool to make it so sound. And in my head, and early on, I was like, man, I just built a website. This is perfect. And like the next day and the next day and the next day, and I'm a month into this and like 200 hours into building this website. And I've been prompting it 176 different edits on the site. And I'm like, this is not a tool to just build a website and see success with right away. Like how much customization it took to make it not produce AI slop. And I'm still trying to clean it up. So I am curious though, your customers are coming to you guys and they've used these tools. They've maybe not to the depth. They don't know how to prompt it correctly, but they've looked at some of the data, some of the same reports that you might ask, and they may not know how to read it. Now they're asking you to steer their strategy. And this is a lot like your question earlier, Joey, where you're like, hey, we can get way better data if we change the phone number to a better tracking system. You just need to get rid of your dang Comcast business phone number. And they're like, no, we don't want it there. How do you guys feel like you are able to counter those conversations when customers are coming in and their authority is an AI built strategy that they want you to implement? How is that conversation going for you guys?
I think thankfully we're at the point where we have case studies and say, we've worked with an industry like yours before, and we have data to validate that, the strategy that we executed for them works really well. And that strategy, at the end of the day, the strategy, we don't work with the e-commerce businesses. That's outside of our expertise, but it's, does your website say what you do for the people that you do it for, where you do it for them? And so I can go back to that roofer example, and location page strategies are a great idea. Someone within your geo radius telling them that you do work there is awesome, but making that content truly unique. Drone videos and photos of actual roofs that you've replaced in that market. Portfolio work of the types of roofs that you replaced in that market. What shingles did you use? What color? What was their problem? Did a storm hit and they suddenly got a leak, and then that leak converted into, needing a new roof? Were they selling their home? Were they buying their home? Suddenly now you have truly in February core update. I know it was for the Discover part of Google. Early in February, they released the core update, but it specifically says Google wants original, timely content. I think Google does want that. And so the location page strategy was technically the right strategy, but executing it with truly unique, original, timely content is a different story. And painting that picture that this is a roof, this location, here are photos that are geolocated to prove it, here is the portfolio to prove it, and now this page targeting X city is very different than page targeting Y city in terms of the portfolio, the case studies, etc. on that page.
That's such a good compliment to what you said too, Curtis. Like, you can use AI for amazing stuff, ad copy, even your descriptions in GBP, and like all those like technical. You just have to have a good foundation of telling a company, like a different tool, what you do for a business. But you don't need to spend forever to be creative writing those out. But now you have to get a little more creative when you're writing specific city-based content. And I love what you like, breaking it down by like the materials. I thought about, if you're in my wife's situation as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I'm thinking, man, the city of this place had a bunch of babies born this month. We can talk about that. That's pretty unique, whatever the case is, right? There's something that I talked to Curtis about when we were prepping for this call. He mentioned the vibe test. And I really liked it. So there's like this vibe test that a website doesn't pass. And I did not pass the vibe test when I first created my wife's website. So I'm curious, and I know this is intangible. How do you guys define passing the vibe test today when it's AI content or human written content? What do you look for? How do you know?
Yeah, that's a really, I feel like we're, everyone, like the whole globe is kind of struggling with that, like where is that uncanny valley, where things seem so weird and fake that you can't trust it, to the other side where it's like, wow, this is actually better than if I had hired actors to do it. Couldn't have done this level of CGI on my own. So yeah, I think that's going to shift over time, probably more towards AI. But I think when and I guess that vibe is different for every person as they land on the site and try to, if there's like a talking head that's clearly AI, that would fail the vibe test in my opinion.
You say we're going to shift more towards AI. Do you think we start accepting that AI content is the norm?
I think eventually, yeah. It may be 5 years, maybe 10 years, but I do feel like that's where it's going quickly. I mean, to the point where there's going to be AI movies where you can't even distinguish if it's actually Brad Pitt or not.
I watched, this is funny, it's more of a personal story. Alita Battle Angel is a movie that one of my friends thought was like amazing. And it wasn't until yesterday that I found out that the main Alita person was actually a human actor and not just an AI person. I'm still confused by it right now. And I was like, I don't know what's real and what's not real anymore. So yeah,
that's happening so quickly. It's insane.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it depends on the business, but your average in-person business, pelvic floor physical therapist, I think that people want to connect with people and they want to hear, I think it's going to go back to human for a lot of small businesses. For example, people they're fearful of AI. They're fearful of a marketing agency scamming them because they've been scammed before. So they want to meet me for coffee. They want me to send donuts to them. They don't want that, but that sets us apart in proving that we are real humans.
They may not know they want that.
They do want donuts. But, I think for a lot of small businesses, it's real testimonials, it's real case studies, it's real before and afters. We work with a piercing studio up in Seattle, and the vibe check for them is pictures of their artists fully tatted on their heads and faces and cool piercings and just a load of gallery of all the different piercings that they've done to prove that they've done it in their space. And I think that's the vibe check for them versus we work with a Medicaid planning company that helps elderly people plan their Medicaid benefits as well as possible. Their website's intentionally kind of old, quote unquote. It's intentionally kind of boring. It's intentionally educational and lots of images of their team, real people. Like, this is the owner of this company, this Medicaid planning company. This is the team. This is their role. Here's a real story and testimonial of an elderly person that they helped. I think people are going to move to that for service-based, whether it's in their home, getting services like a roofer, or getting services from a medical provider or a lawyer or a marketing consultant. Whereas perhaps more of like the larger brands that sell tens of thousands of pairs of shoes, they're going to do some really cool things with AI to create some really, really cool video content that it would cost them a lot of money to do otherwise. And so I think there's going to be like a dichotomy here of, I think, small businesses, human, larger businesses that are pushing out a lot of product perhaps don't need that human touch as much, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It definitely varies industry to industry. And I would say the human element is going to be a strong differentiator across all of them. Like whatever brands are able to, and maybe the most successful will be those that can pull in new prospects through the most compelling, eye-popping AI content and ads, and just accelerating that creative testing so that their click-through rates are always through the roof. And then once they're on the site, just a heavy human element differentiator to, and that kind of like straddles the line so that you're like leveraging AI to its fullest extent to drive the most qualified traffic possible as cheaply as possible, and then maximizing your conversion rate with a heavy emphasis on that human touch.
We've kind of answered this, but I still want to bring it up. I managed at a Best Buy for a few years. And that when I was there, it was like 2010 to 2014. This was a stretch where online shopping, I feel like, had established itself and was growing quickly. And the message from corporate was that, hey, don't worry, people are going to want to come in, they're going to want to see a TV, they're going to want to type on that laptop keyboard. And Joey's laughing. Curtis, you're probably laughing too. I think people started adopting like Newegg and a bunch of other tech websites at that point in time and getting reviews and just being able to find what they wanted instead of what was limited in store. I'm curious if to compare this to like AI today. We talk about like craving that authenticity of that human interaction. But and this is maybe a tough comparison, when Google ads first showed up, I'm sure people were like, no one's ever going to click on that. Right? Like, this is stupid. We don't want the Google ad there. I wanted to look what I was searching for, not what you wanted to give to me. But the average user, we know, will still get caught looking at an ad, right? They'll still click on an ad. They may not have intended to, but it worked. With AI and the content that's happening, it feels like we're fighting it a bit, saying that it's not natural, it's not authentic. But there's AI influencers, there's AI actors. At what point do you need to fully adopt AI and stop trying to act like the authenticity is really the factor and you just play the volume of this is what's working? And even cheaper than having like authentic video recordings, you can have an AI influencer instead. How do you project the future of AI in marketing? And I'll simplify the question with the context there. Where do you see agencies in the next 2 to 3 years? What do you think they evolve into?
That's an impossible question to answer. I think the answer is it depends. I think the answer is it depends, and there's going to be a market for the agency that basically does everything with AI that's $250 a month for a small business, and it's something. They're not doing anything otherwise. I think there's going to be a lot of businesses that are, skeptical and they want to meet for coffee. They want someone local because I've heard it over and over again. I worked with a company out of Canada and then India and then Florida, and I'm just kind of pissed off that I feel like I'm not getting the attention that my business deserves. And so I want to meet you face to face and shake your hand and hold you accountable to getting me results. I think that's going to be a sliver of the market. I think there's going to be kind of a market for a lot of different types of agencies, some that are heavily AI and some that aren't. And I think they just have to get in front of their audience that wants what they have to offer versus trying to shove a solution to the entire market.
Yeah, to dovetail off, I agree. It will depend for sure. And I feel like the most successful agencies will straddle the line between both, between integrating AI workflows, first and foremost, to accelerate delivery and optimization quality. And then when it comes to AI generation, generative AI, straddling that line between authenticity and speed of delivery, speed of creation. Like if we were able to produce 5 videos where we could only produce one before, chances are one of those 5 will perform as well, if not better. And it'll just be like a matter of creating a very robust authenticity filter, which is probably like just a manual review with your kind of editorial team to see if it passes the vibe test, so to speak. Like, does it look fake or does it feel real? If it feels real, then we might as well test it. Like, and then what I'm doing with a lot of our clients is we're creating AI videos, at a fraction of the rate that they're able to create their traditional ones, and we're just A/B testing them and seeing what works better and leaning into that with us first reviewing it to make sure it's not complete slop and kind of feels real. And even if you can kind of tell it's AI, we'll still go and test it just to see if the click-through rate, conversion rate's better, because we really don't know until we test. And so we're trying to just lean into that as data-driven as possible and give all of our advertisers that option.
I think you guys answered that extremely well when I put you on the spot. I didn't even let you know that was going to be a question coming onto the podcast. So thanks, guys. I think it's maybe a myth or a rumor I heard in like 5th grade where there was a guy that worked at like the patent office like 150 years ago and was like, "Yep, everything's been invented. We're pretty much done here. Like, what else are we going to come up with?" And I think of AI leveling the playing field, and like everyone's like, "Oh wow, we've invented everything. Now we can all do this." It's like, yeah, except for there's someone else being creative right now, and they're making something that you can't think of with AI. That's where I feel like agencies have such a cool place to be, is like differentiating from the slop, which we lovingly refer to some of the AI content that's created without thought. So, guys, this has been a great episode of SEO On Air. I appreciate you joining us as guests, and hopefully we'll have you on again. Thanks for joining us.